Good evening, everyone. My name's Minty Ledger, and I'm the Interim Executive Director at Cambridge University Health Partners. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the third Cambridge Biomedical Campus on Virtual Tour event. Our aim throughout this series has been to bring our clinicians, researchers and academics direct to you in your living rooms, kitchens and offices, where they can explain their work, the challenges they face, and their thoughts on what health and care will look like in the years ahead. Tonight, I'm really pleased to introduce Professor Richard Gilbertson, who is Director of the Cancer Research UK Cambridge Centre at the University of Cambridge, and he's also Head of the Department of Oncology and a Senior Group Leader researching children's cancers at the Cancer Research UK Cambridge Institute. Richard will be telling us all about the new Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital, which is a new development on the biomedical campus announced by government a few weeks ago. This new hospital aims to rewrite the story of cancer by connecting clinical expertise from Addenbrooke and Royal Papworth with world-class science across the University of Cambridge and with industry partners. Patients will benefit from the latest innovations and treatments in early cancer detection and precision cancer medicine. So as usual, throughout this evening's talk, you can ask questions at any time using the Q&A box, and these will then be addressed at the end of his presentation by Richard. To reassure you all, you won't be seen or heard during this event, but it will be recorded and made available on our website afterwards, and we'll also send you a link to the recording by email. Many thanks indeed to Richard for his time this evening, and also to Jill Wilson and Tony Taylorson, who have worked very hard behind the scenes to put on the event for you tonight. So all I have to do now is to hand over to Richard and wish you all a very enjoyable evening.
Great, thank you, Minty. It's fantastic to be here. So as Minty's already said, my name is Richard Gilbertson, and I have the honour of chairing the Department of Oncology at the University of Cambridge and also directing the CRUK Cambridge Centre. And what I've been asked to do this evening is just to give you an idea of the sort of work that we do in Cambridge, how we're organised to try and tackle cancer, and how that has led to the concept and the design, and we hope building in the next 5 years of a new Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital. I think nobody out there will need reminding of the human and fiscal cost of cancer. Cancer ranks among 5 of the top 10 causes of death worldwide. And tragically, even in this country, about a quarter of all patients with cancer will present in accident and emergency, and those patients do particularly badly. So in a developed country, that's really not a good figure for us to be dealing with and facing today. If we look across the world, this is from America, from the American Association of Cancer Research, but this is a global figure. And from 2010 to 2030, we estimate a doubling and tripling almost, both in the cost of cancer, but also the number of cases that will be affected around the world with cancer. If we get closer to home, we can start to look at some of the more granular issues that face us in the UK in tackling cancer. In the UK, although we have a fantastic cancer service delivered through the NHS, we have really great regional disparities in outcome of cancer. So this map on the left is showing in orange those areas that are particularly badly affected in terms of their outcomes of cancer relative to those that do particularly well. And if you look in our region, we have juxtapositions of those areas doing particularly well with those areas doing particularly badly. So we have regional disparity in our cancer outcomes. Also, this is true around the world, we still are reactive to cancer, not proactive. So this cancer pathway in which we pick up cancer in the community, pass it forward into tertiary care is disjointed, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And also unmasked by COVID is the capacity of our healthcare system to cope with the demands of cancer, both in terms of its increasing complexity of how we tackle it, but also the increasing numbers. And so what COVID has done is unmask the fragility of our NHS system, which means when we depend on tertiary care systems, particularly exclusively almost for cancer, then we're really in challenge when we have that test and that stress test of the system. But the UK also has some fantastic advantages when it comes to managing cancer. I spent 15 years working in the US up until about 5 years ago, And their primary healthcare system is pretty awful, actually, compared to what we have in the UK. With our army of general practitioners, nurse practitioners, and other healthcare professionals out in the community, we truly have a world-class primary care system out there at the coalface in communities where patients live and work. We also have one of the best world's science and biotech sectors that's been particularly identified and really amplified through the life science industrial strategy in recent years. But Cambridge is a world-class university, exemplified by the Nobel Prizes they won in Cambridge. But many institutions around the UK truly are world-class and partnering with the biotech sector to really bring advantages and discoveries and innovations in cancer into the frontline care of patients. Also, I find particularly impressive in this country, which again is not so true in a system like the US, which we're often compared with, where there's a sort of diaspora among the different states, where there are different rules and regulations. We have a single party payer system in our healthcare, 60 to 70 million individuals being treated through the same system. That allows stakeholders to unite, whether it's through the NHS long-term plan, Cancer Research UK, or the MRC and other aspects through the funding streams that we have that can truly come together and share a common vision in what we see in terms of cancer. However, that system is not perfect, and there are strategic challenges to defeating cancer. I want to particularly focus on what is a fragmented and disjointed care system. So I mentioned we have fantastic primary care. Patients will be picked up. Maybe they will be in the bathroom, there'll be blood in the toilet, there'll be a lump noticed in the breast, or whatever it might be, and they'll visit their GP. Their GP will refer their patient then onto a waiting list, and that will be rapidly progressed through to tertiary and secondary and tertiary care. That patient will then go through a clinical advisory group we call an MDT, or multidisciplinary team that will design the treatment for that patient. Often in places like Cambridge, there will be a research environment which is basically interfacing with that advanced treatment that's happening. However, each of these elements are rather disjointed and fragmented. What that means is there are innumerable missed opportunities and inefficiencies in the system, and that's what we're trying to tackle in Cambridge. It's about 5 years ago when I moved to Cambridge from the States, and we entered into a period when we were re-looking at our strategy and indeed competing to be a major centre within the UK. We were successful in that competition. Cambridge is now the largest CRUK funded organisation in the UK. We're divided into 12 programmes, 8 that focus on the most common and challenging cancers, 4 that focus on real differentiators for cancer that Cambridge brings to the table, things like basic research, advanced imaging, early detection, and then also interfacing with the biotech sector that we see on the biomedical campus. We have a large number of scientists, healthcare professionals, allied healthcare professionals, and those in training, students, PhD, and also postdocs working with us. And we're across the entire landscape of Cambridge, 24 university departments, 2 NHS trust hospitals with the relocation of Royal Papworth onto the biomedical campus, 9 world-leading institutions and 4 major pharmaceutical companies all take part in this large effort, which is the Cambridge Cancer Centre. So what's our strategic approach? And beginning back in 2016, we got these 12 programs together, and we decided that we would focus on 4 main issues where we could really make a difference in this fight against cancer. The first of those was to conduct transformational basic research. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The second was to take a proactive approach to cancer, and I'll focus much of my time on that. And then, of course, very importantly, training the next generation of physicians, scientists, nurses, healthcare professionals to tackle a new era in cancer treatment, and partnering extremely importantly with the public. Now, we took a very strategic decision in devising these 4 objectives to align ourselves directly with Cancer Research UK, the major funder in the UK, along with the NHS long-term plan, which I was involved in writing a couple of years ago. And that allowed us to align these 4 objectives with all of the major funding initiatives that have been put forward by CRUK and other bodies, and some of those are listed here. So, for example, now in Cambridge, we are the the only cancer research acute brain tumour centre of excellence for children. We're also one of the major units in the radiation oncology network, which is brand new and spans the country. We are a major centre for early cancer detection, which is a real feature in the Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital. Also, we've established a new institute called the Mark Foundation Institute for Integrated Cancer Medicine, which is bringing together multiple research streams to make the best possible decisions for patients, and I'll talk a bit more about that. Then we have training programs, and of course, this all coalesces onto the Cancer Research Hospital and converges onto this initiative, which we're excited to introduce over the next 5 years. So what I'm trying to bring out here is that what we're not trying to do in Cambridge is simply build a shiny new hospital, as good as that would be for patients. But this is strategy driven. This is actually seeking to change the patient care pathway and the way that we treat patients with cancer forever. Now, beyond Cambridge, we're also an advantage that we are a member of a large global community in cancer. We're a founding member of Cancer Core Europe. That's 6 of the leading cancer centres in Europe, which has about 3 million patients in a virtual centre, with millions of treatments given every year into these individual patients, and also multiple clinical trials, about 1,500 at the moment, acted. And this gives us incredible power in terms of being able to really understand cancer and treat it on a global scale. Now, with that strategy, we've been able to drive forward the growth of the centre over the last 5 years. This just shows 2 commonly used metrics for that. This is the funding that we've brought into Cambridge through this initiative, and the growth in our membership, now over 800 physicians, scientists, nurses, doctors across the greater Cambridge area, working and tackling together on a strategy to beat cancer. So what does that mean for patients? What does that mean for the healthcare system? I think that means that we need to deploy 4 strategic pillars, and that really aligns with the strategy in the Cancer Centre. 4 pillars that will change the way we treat cancer forever. And the underpinning strategy for this is to be proactive, not reactive. For too long in cancer, we've waited for patients to realize something was wrong. I think what's fantastic about the era we're in at the moment, and as I'll talk a little bit about, this is really thanks to the ingenuity, the innovations of physics, chemistry, engineering, and mathematics. We're now closer than ever to having those technologies that can detect cancer in the body before we even know it exists. Now, the reason that's important is because we stage cancer. That's the way we talk about cancer in terms of how extensive it is in the body. Many patients, unfortunately, still present with the higher stages, that's stage 3 or 4, when the cancer is either spread beyond the organ it's in or is disseminated throughout the body. Unfortunately, only about 20% of those patients will be surviving at 5 years. In contrast, if we take those same diseases and just diagnose them just a few months earlier, when they're still stage 1 or stage 2, so confined to that original organ, their survival chances are 80% at 5 years. And more importantly, on top of that, those patients can be treated closer to home with less invasive, less toxic treatments. So together, this is a fantastic opportunity to be proactive and not reactive. The second theme, which Cancer Cambridge is really uniquely set up to do, is to integrate all data precisely. That's take the fantastic resource we have in the detailed research we do, and I'll show examples of this in a minute, and integrate that directly to make the best possible decisions for patients. On top of that, we also need to ensure that the NHS is a partner and not a passive recipient of scientific advances. We need to push the academic fields directly into the NHS system so that there is a seamless integration with the way that the NHS works. And I'm part of an innovation committee. I chair that for NHS England at the moment, where we're doing exactly this. We're horizon scanning industry at the moment and academia to find those optimal and best placed new innovations that we can actually bring directly into the clinic for patients. And through that, we will reinvent the patient care pathway. And I just want to give you a few examples of that. So strategic pillar 1, let's be proactive, not reactive. At the moment, we have a fairly limited cancer screening capacity. Some of the cancer screening that we have, mammography, cervical smears, etc., they've been around for a very, very long time. But we're on the cusp of developing a completely new series of innovations. Now, about 75% of patients will come through some form of cancer screening in a very loose way. That's coming through the GP, who may have done a clinical screen or some other format. However, still, as I've mentioned before, about 25% of those patients will present to accident and emergency with never realizing they ever had cancer, and those patients do particularly badly. So how do we improve that? How do we push back understanding and understanding when that disease presents before that patient even knows? And that's a problem of detection. It's one that biology, physics, chemistry, and engineering together can solve. So the NHS needs to develop and deploy precision screening approaches for all cancers. So I'm going to give you a case study which is developed by Rebecca Fitzgerald here in Cambridge, and that's for esophageal cancer. This is a particularly nasty cancer, about 9,200 new cases of this every year in the UK, and it's increasing. Unfortunately, it has an abysmal outcome which hasn't changed very much in the last 2 decades, with about only 15% of patients surviving 5 years. Screening essentially for this was non-existent. And the reason I've picked this example out is because COVID has particularly unmasked the fragility of this. So the diagnosis of this previously required that every patient had an endoscopy, shown in the picture here. That is, if you were suspected of having this or the precursor of this called Barrett's esophagus, you had to go into a secondary or tertiary care system and have a camera investigation, which involved skilled technicians and physicians to make that diagnosis, looking for these changes in the esophagus. And of course, that has a huge demand on the healthcare system. So what Rebecca did with her team over the last 10 years or so is develop this really innovative, very simple test. It's a pill on a string which is swallowed, that goes down into the stomach. You hold the string, that is released and then is pulled out, and it basically scrapes cells off the esophagus as it comes back up. And that can pick up the early precursor of esophageal cancer, what we call Barrett's esophagus, and that can be treated very effectively as an outpatient. And she's just published that this year, showing that it's about 10 times better at detecting Barrett's than the current standard of care. So a fantastic innovation that can be deployed for pennies in primary care. Now, the other thing that I find particularly exciting about this is I showed you this graph earlier at the beginning, or this map earlier at the beginning, which shows our region with some of the best and worst performing regions for healthcare outcomes across our geographical area. Now, this shows here on the right the GP surgeries that are involved in this study. And as you can see, they paint throughout these different health disparate regions. And that's really exciting to see that this technology is being put into the hands of general practitioners working where there's some of the best outcomes and where there's some of the worst outcomes. And it's this kind of approach which is going to help us relieve healthcare disparities. But because we're in Cambridge and we have a sort of plethora of physics and engineering ongoing, there are many other examples of this. For example, the lung cancer has been detected now by a breath biopsy. So this is an approach where developed by Billy Boyle and the team at Alstone. So Billy was a graduate of Cambridge. They've developed a test where you can breathe out and it detects the organic compounds, volatile compounds that are produced by cancer. And that's being investigated at the moment as a potential way of picking up cancer. What's exciting about that is it might pick up the actual chemicals that lung cancer produces, or we might be able to develop inert tracers that we give to patients that are specifically modified by cancer cells, and then we can detect those that are breathed out. And that's a very exciting approach. Or in lung cancer, the so-called endoscopy pill, where previously we would have to do endoscopy using fixed cameras that were from outside the body. But now we're looking at opportunities using hologram technology to swallow a pill which passes through the system. That's been around for a while, but this particular technology uses holographic imaging to see where there are changes in the mucosa, the lining of the colon, even when they can't be visualized with standard imaging. The second strategic pillar is to take the data that we get from patients when they're diagnosed and integrate it to make the best possible decisions. So if we think about a patient today presenting with cancer, that patient in a very sophisticated environment like Cambridge or London or Newcastle, one of the sort of major leading tertiary hospitals in the UK, they all get pretty much the same kind of treatment. They will come in, they'll be seen by a really skilled physician and nurse, they'll have a clinical exam, there'll be pathological examination of a tissue which is moved, they'll have imaging, they'll have, if they're fortunate, mutation testing, which might be around 4 to 8 different mutations. They're the spelling mistakes that we find in the DNA that drives cancer. But even today, this is still rudimentary and poorly predictive of the outcome of patients, not just about necessarily how this patient will ultimately do in terms of their disease and how their disease will behave, but how they will respond to treatment. And unfortunately, we know that conventional therapy in this plan will still fail in about 50% of patients. Now we have this research environment which is incredibly rich, testing the latest imaging, testing the latest liquid biopsies. What that means is we know that tumors shed their material, shed their information out into the blood. With a blood test, we can pick that up in the blood. We can also sequence at minutiae all of the DNA, the blueprint of the tumor by reading its genome, 3 billion base pairs, looking throughout the entire encyclopedia of the tumor, its entire blueprint and mapping, and looking for those spelling mistakes that make cancer. However, these are completely separated from one another, and we don't usually integrate them for the purpose of making the best decisions for patients. So what we'd like to do is do what we're doing in Cambridge now, which is this new Institute for Integrated Cancer Medicine. So this is taking this very detailed information, liquid biopsies on patients, 25,000 genes they're reading out of the language that the tumor is speaking, the DNA that is making the tumor drive forward through their spelling mistakes, and the kind of imaging which is available in Cambridge where we can actually look at the actual biochemistry that a tumor is using in real time. Now, each of that pieces of information can be turned into numbers. Essentially, you can take an image, you can take a DNA information, you can take a histology information on a slide, turn all of that into pixels. All of that can be numbers. And you can envisage this information like a cloud of numbers, which is describing what a patient is, what their disease is doing. And using mathematics through the computational Department of Computational Science in Cambridge and also statistics, we are now integrating that data so that we can start to understand not just what one test means or two tests means, but in a holistic sense, what do all of those tests mean together? And how does one test perhaps deprioritize another one or make you look at another test because of how this information speaks to one another mathematically? And if we do that serially through the disease of a patient, that cloud will change shape. And hopefully what we can do is not just decide the treatment a patient needs today, but what will that patient's disease be doing in 6 months' time or in a year's time so we can be ready for it. Now, the real power of that is when this seamlessly integrates from early detection. So we're picking up those patients as early as possible in the disease, hopefully intervening as soon as possible. But for those patients who, unfortunately, early detection doesn't work, we can feed them straight into this system. And we're delighted to have some major partners in this. AstraZeneca, for example, Illumina and other major life science industry partners are working with us on this. We're doing this all in the context of prospective clinical trials, not looking back to patients who've been treated, but looking forward in cohorts of patients. Now, to illustrate that, I want to tell you a little bit about breast cancer. Breast cancer is particularly aggressive disease, as many of you will know. It's one of the commonest cancers we face, with 55,000 cases diagnosed in the UK each year and more than 11,000 deaths. Now, previously, even with the fairly sophisticated stains we could do and some sequencing analysis looking for those spelling mistakes in patients' tumors, we still had a pretty rudimentary and poorly predictive way of assessing disease. So the opportunity here is to take all of those ways of looking at the disease, that cloud of numbers approach, and asking the question, can we get better at treating breast cancer and helping women find the right therapy for their disease? So by integrating this information together, we've done exactly that. So let's imagine 700 breast cancer patients. This is not theoretical. This is actually the numbers of patients that we've now put in Cambridge through the Precision Breast Cancer program. In fact, it's now over 800 patients. Now, previously, the old system for looking at this, which was based on just looking at the histology and about 8 mutations in 4 genes, we could predict the sort of clinical management in about 11% of those patients with breast cancer. Now, taking this approach that we've done by integrating these different data sets, that's now gone up to much larger, about 88% of patients. And that's based on now a large number of mutations, 572 cases. Now, what's particularly exciting is that that has directly changed the management of 40% of patients now. That can include picking up patients who have a family history of cancer that we never realized before, or directly dictating the kinds of treatments that we should give to patients. And we're already seeing advances in some of the most aggressive diseases. Triple negative breast cancer is a particularly bad form of cancer, but we've already seen an increase in the response to the primary treatment from 40 to 70% just by using this approach. This is the work of Jean Abraham and Carlos Caldas in the breast cancer program here in Cambridge. But it's not just about Cambridge. What we like to think in the way we're doing this is if we can cure one patient in Cambridge, we can cure 1,000 worldwide. This is about disseminating that knowledge out as rapidly as possible. And already in the UK, we have all of these sites open as well as sites worldwide. And this approach is already reaching a population of about 17 million patients across the UK, and then increasingly to Israel, Australia, and beyond. So when we take this information, we can start to integrate it through this precision process. And we're now bringing this computational approach directly into the ward. So the ward rounds, some of you may have seen on some of the films that watch, the old Doctor in the House films that I used to watch, where a consultant would shout at students. I'm afraid that still happens. But also what happens now is actually in real time, we'll be integrating this information and helping guide our decisions based specifically on this kind of data, which is available to the physicians and the nursing staff and the allied healthcare professionals at the coal face on the ward. And actually just in this simple graphic, I'll show that our pre-model prediction of how a patient would do was about 50-50, but now using this integrated approach, it's about 95% now accurate in terms of predicting what the initial response will be for patients to their primary therapy. But this is not just a pipe dream. Not only are we doing it in real time now in the clinic, but this is a legacy which has been going on in Cambridge long before I got here. Bruce Ponder, who was my predecessor, began this with the Cancer Centre way before I got here. And there's been a fantastic growth in this area over the last 5 years. But Predict Cancer is a really good example of how Cambridge has got a long-standing history in this area. This is a very simple idea. So around the world, again, about getting rid of healthcare disparities, there are individual patients around the world who might be fortunate enough to be centres who can do really outstanding care in integration. And there are other centres where care or access to sort of advanced insights might not be as available. What this very simple test allows the physician to do is load up some very basic and now increasing sophisticated biology information about the disease. And based on thousands of patients, it will predict what the patient is likely to do in real time for the physician while they're having that discussion with the woman or the man who has breast cancer. This allows that patient and the doctor together make real-time informed decisions, which is really exciting for that relationship to help the patient feel that they've really had the optimal information to their hand to make these decisions. There's already been 1.25 million sessions of this, only about a quarter of those in the UK. Hundreds and thousands of those have occurred in over 100 countries around the world. So this brings me to the sort of last part of my talk, which is the cancer hospital. So what I've tried to explain over the last sort of half an hour or so is the importance of the science here that's being done. It's not the kind of science which is just pie in the sky or trying to sort of make novel insights for the sake of it. That science is important. We are doing that. We are pushing back the frontiers and pushing forward into understanding the biology of normal tissue, of how cancer first develops and how cancer progresses and how to treat it better. But critically, we're trying to make the gap between those discoveries and patients smaller and smaller, so that the kind of innovations that we're developing don't take 20, 30, 40 or 50 years to get to the front line, but much shorter periods of time. And as I mentioned earlier, the critical thing about that, the only way to do that is to bring that science directly to the bedside of the patient in the NHS. Having spent 15 years in the States, I'm a huge fan of the NHS. It is a phenomenal organization. again, in which there's a single system for serving 60 to 70 million patients. And we have to be able to use this better. So the cancer hospital that we're designing in Cambridge is truly unique. It won't just have physicians, nurses, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, all the other fantastic frontline individuals that we're used to seeing, but it will be the home to physicists, chemists, engineers, mathematicians, directly in the heart of the building. In fact, you're probably as likely to meet a physicist or an engineer who works in the hospital as you are a nurse or a doctor. So here's a view of the biomedical campus at the moment. They'll be familiar with this. This is the new AstraZeneca building. This is the new Royal Papworth Hospital. Over here is one of the cancer research buildings. This is currently AstraZeneca. And this new building here in this CGI creation is where the Cancer Research Hospital will be. So that hospital will truly have a regional and a national and an international view. It was approved that they outlined business case by the Trust Board back in 2018. And then in 2019, we're delighted that Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Matt Hancock, with the Prime Minister, of course, announced a £1 billion investment to rebuild CUH Trust, which would include a cancer hospital. And that was for the cancer hospital, again, affirmed just a couple of months ago by Boris Johnson with the hospital infrastructure project, where again, we've been told that the money will be forthcoming to build this hospital. So hugely exciting. And we're now all off to the races at designing this. So in the hospital, it will have a fully integrated center for early detection. And I'll show you a little bit about that in a moment, where it's uniting these individuals to devise those innovations to detect cancer as early as possible. But importantly, it will also have a commercialization in also accelerating the jobs in the region, the training of nursing staff in the region. There are fantastic partners in the academic sector across the East Anglia region, in Peterborough, Anglia Ruskin. And these are places that are training now with Anglia Ruskin's new medical school with a particular focus on the community, training general practitioners, training primary healthcare nurses. These are the heroes who will be on the front line deploying early cancer detection devices. And so to partner with those individuals directly will be fantastic. This early cancer detection center will have GP surgeries based in it. So we can get the advice of GPs early on directly to physicists, chemists, and engineers saying that will never go or never fly in primary care, but this will. We'll also be the home to advanced imaging, as well as AI and machine learning. So artificial intelligence and machine learning to really integrate the data sets that I talked about for that precision medicine approach. And then finally, something which is never really predicted before from COVID, but really has forced all of us to change, is the way we interact with patients. So more than ever, we interact with patients online through video conferencing. Although that's not ideal at all in terms of many situations, if we're talking to patients as a touch point, that could actually be really used in a very sensible and way where patients can be treated much closer to home and given advice much closer to home. So we're looking very carefully at how we can use IT and telemedicine as part of a holistic approach for ambulatory care and inpatients. So this is where it's positioned. This is the latest view of that, right next to the AstraZeneca building, right next door to Addenbrooke's. And as I mentioned, it will include a precision breast cancer center, Institute for Integrated Cancer Medicine, and this National Institute for Early Cancer Detection. It's going to be on 6 floors, 24,000 meters squared. At the moment, it's costed about £216 million. Fully integrated, as I mentioned, we'll have diagnostics in there, an outpatient and a clinical trials unit, so we can test some of the latest drugs that AstraZeneca and other partners are developing, as well as chemotherapy and ambulatory and inpatient care. So I'm going to leave it there. I know it's a lot of information to take on board, but I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has any. But thank you very much for your attention.
Lovely. Thank you, Richard, for that. That's a fantastic talk and incredibly interesting to see how things are progressing, and not just looking at the hospital, the new cancer hospital, but also all the work that's gone into getting you into the position you're in at the moment. So we have a few questions that have already come in. I'll start with one of the first, which is reasonably simple. How are you linking with the Royal Marsden in Chelsea and Sutton? Are you linking, it kind of was thinking one of the things I was thinking about in how do you create this network across not just the region, but across the UK and the impact that might have?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. I can give two very concrete examples of that. So Cancer Research UK is a fantastic organisation, not just because of the way it funds cancer, which is the generosity of the public, but also the way it's building very thoughtfully a network. So the Institute for Cancer Research and the aligned Royal Marsden Hospital is another major centre within the UK. And through that, there's about 4 major centres now. We directly collaborate with them on many of our trials, but also actually in terms of the Children's Brain Tumour Centre of Excellence, we are equal partners in that. So the Institute for Cancer Research and the aligned Royal Marsden is an equal partner in that. And very excitingly, we're developing brand new treatments for children's brain tumours. So we do a lot of the science in childhood brain tumour work in Cambridge, but they have in the Royal Marsden and at the ICR one of the largest academic drug development groups in the world. And they are actually taking our insights, developing novel therapeutics, and then sharing that information back with us so we can test them in the laboratory. So that kind of to and froing of research is exactly what we do with the Royal Marsden, and that happens on other levels as well. So it is a very good partnership.
Great, thank you. The next question that's come in will be, will you be testing people who have a family history of aggressive cancer but no symptoms yet?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So actually that is the focus of some of our early detection efforts, particularly because when you're first developing or trying to understand whether early detection will work, obviously you've got 2 options. You could just go to the general public and the numbers of patients likely to be at risk is diluted in there. But if there's a pointer to say, actually, this particular population is going to be likely enriched for patients who are at high risk of cancer, then that's a good place to start to understand whether your test is working or not. There are challenges we're learning from that, though, in that, of course, that population is not the general population. So a population who presents already with, so for example, a mutation they inherit, which puts them at risk of cancer, the biology of their cancer is probably going to be slightly different. And so understanding how that would be then translated to a general population is a challenge that we need to face. But it's certainly in terms of enriching the initial focus for research, it's very useful.
Does it shorten that? This might be a naive question, so sorry about this, but does it shorten the kind of the time that someone might be get the treatment or be detected if you kind of know that their family has that history of cancer, whatever form it is?
Absolutely. So the Department of Medical Genetics here in Cambridge that's chaired by Eamon Marr, has particular expertise in that area, and actually they've researched and discovered many of the at-risk loci. In fact, I mentioned my predecessor Bruce Ponder earlier, and he was very instrumental in some of the early studies about what at-risk loci might exist that would cause you to look at particular populations enriched for cancer. Now, some of those are more difficult, so it's just subtle changes in the DNA. So it's a suggestion that there might be some at risk here. Some of them much more barn door. There's a single mutation which we know has a particular risk of cancer. So it does depend on the nature of that. But actually, we have clinics in Cambridge that are actually focused particularly on those families that are at risk.
Okay, thanks. Someone's just asked a little bit of follow-up to the question of family history. Would the hospital, well, I assume it's the new cancer hospital, be a potential partner to validate the utility of such tests to identify risk groups?
Absolutely. So the Early Detection Centre is specifically set up to do that. So I gave the example of the Barrett's esophagus with the cytosponge sponge. There's also the example of the breathalyzer. So what we envisage is this will actually be, so a little bit more information about the Early Detection Centre, what I'm really excited about, which is Rebecca Fitzgerald's idea, is actually right in the heart of this will be what we call the Innovation Hotel. So that will be lab space that doesn't belong to Cambridge. It literally belongs to the world. So if you've got the brightest minds in the world sitting in Boston, Cambridge, Oxford, or in Stanford, on the west coast of the US, those individuals, or in Hong Kong, wherever it might be, or in India, if they've got a fantastic idea, they can bring their group to that innovation hotel and actually work with our physicians and scientists to rapidly develop that. And it's about actually bringing those ideas to a site where there is expertise in early cancer detection. Although it sounds very exciting, this is a completely new field. It's a completely different way of practicing medicine. you're working with patients or individuals who do not know they're sick. And you're intervening in a situation where perhaps somebody has no symptoms or has yet not developed fully fledged cancer. So understanding how you measure that, how you understand it, requires a very different approach than if you're doing a clinical trial with somebody who has a lung cancer or a breast cancer or a bowel cancer. So actually having that expertise in-house, but giving scientists around the world access to that is a fantastic way of opening up the resource in Cambridge and making sure our patients actually benefit from that as quickly as possible.
In terms of kind of the emotional side of informing people of the impact that early detection would have, how do you go around about talking to someone, a member of the public who feels absolutely fine, has no history of cancer in their family? How do you go about having those conversations that, look, this is what we found, this is what we need to do going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I am not an expert in that. So, but I think it does speak to, I think what has particularly impressed me about the early detection program here in Cambridge. So, Rebecca Fitzgerald and Sarah Bondiak, who lead that, have done a really quite incredible thing where they've engaged all of the schools in Cambridge. I mean the schools within the university. So, a critical component of early detection is the humanities. So they're actually addressing what does it mean for the general public to even be screened for cancer? Is it acceptable? You know, and so they're asking those very, very important questions because we assume that everybody would want to know, well, what if you don't want to know? What do you do in that situation? And this is critical because screening programs only work. Their success is directly proportional to the number of individuals who are willing to take part in it. As that number drops, the cost of the screening program actually becomes more than the actual detection of the disease. So you've got to make sure you take all of these critical, psychological, sociological, all of these aspects into account. And what's very impressive about the early detection program in Cambridge is they're not just focusing on the science, not just focusing on the physics or the biology, but they're looking equally at all of these questions so that when they develop those tests, they are absolutely fit for purpose in the community in the UK.
Okay. Next question that's come in is how will you decide on which will be the priority cancers to be researched and treated in the new hospital?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the reasons we're developing the integrated cancer medicine and early detection approach is they're agnostic for disease. So we do have a breast cancer centre in there because that is currently our leading program in a disease focused way. But the idea of the integrated cancer medicine and early detection centre. So for example, the institute I mentioned for integrated cancer medicine, currently we have a ovarian, breast, pancreatic, renal, and a leukemia, lymphoma program in there. And they're running at the moment using the resources, but purposely doing the same sorts of science imaging, liquid biopsies, and adopting those for those diseases. Now, when those studies are actually complete, and we hope we've built the algorithms for those, we would envisage that would move more into routine care, still research to refine them, but then you would have another trial. Maybe it'll be in lung cancer, maybe it will be in another form of cancer, skin cancer, or whatever it might be. There's another guiding principle that we have in Cambridge, and that is we can't do everything. We like to think we can, but we can't do everything. And so we choose excellence. We choose where we in Cambridge can actually make the biggest difference. And that's actually guided our strategy to date. So it's a combination of sort of when a disease has matured and we've moved it into routine care, what is the next opportunity, but the priority will be based on the best ideas and where we can have the biggest impact.
Great, thank you. Next one is, are you and you might have covered one of this a little bit already, but I just want to make sure that we don't miss anyone's question. But are you conducting any cell therapy or gene therapy research?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I guess in terms of cell therapy, what might be referred to as sort of parts of immuno-oncology. And traditionally, or historically in Cambridge, we've not had great strengths in that. We've focused on the things that we've built the centre on, the things we do have great strengths on. But over the last year, actually prompted by the progress that's been happening in immunotherapy, we've been looking very carefully at what we can do in Cambridge and contribute to that. And certainly in hematological malignancies like leukemias and lymphomas, we have great expertise. So Ben Utenhol, who's leading that in the Department of Hematology, is a fantastic leader in that for the UK. I think we're one of only 3 sites for some aspects of CAR T-cell therapy. We have a brand new building on campus in the Geoffrey Cheer Biomedical Centre, which includes CITID, which is a centre for immunotherapy, which has got some what we call clean rooms, which allows us to actually develop CAR T-cell based and cellular therapies. And we've got actually a number of those, actually 2 sites supporting that sort of work. So actually we're pretty much advanced really in terms of cell therapy. I think what we're less advanced in is what we would sort of call molecular immunotherapy. So those are drugs which actually trick the immune system or provoke the immune system into attacking cancers. And that's an area that we really need to look at more carefully. In terms of gene therapy, historically, again, not so much in cancer, although we have done some of that work in pancreatic cancer. And we've got a very good new junior group leader in pancreatic cancer who's interested in that. So our focus has been predominantly on those areas where we have great expertise. But in the cellular therapies, that certainly definitely exists in Cambridge.
Okay. The next question actually feeds into one of the things I was thinking about when you were saying it, about how can startups from outside the UK engage with the Early Detection Centre to explore potential collaboration projects? Because you were talking in the presentation about how you were actively going out there and searching for ideas and treatments and innovations going forward to actually bring in. But how do you know you're choosing the right ones? It reminded me a little bit of kind of how people perceived the UK government in the 1970s of having a pot of cash that would give to anyone. So how do you go about that process? How do you know who's going to be, I don't want to say it, but who's going to be a winner going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, we don't give them any cash, so that's a big help to start with. So again, it's all based on excellence. So we're looking at what is the science behind this, very rigorously looking at the science that is sort of being touted as a potential innovation. And also we begin very cautiously. So we might begin with one study like we did with the Alstone initiative. And also I think the advantage with the early detection devices is that although it's not a reason to do them, they are much less invasive than some of the other interventional trials that one might take part in. So I think that also helps in terms of looking at the feasibility in a much more straightforward way. But actually, it's mainly outward. So a lot of the innovations that are being developed are internal to Cambridge, particularly on the West Cambridge site. So physics for medicine, etc., in the chemistry building and engineering sites. They're actually developing these innovations and they're spinning out all the time, either with venture capital or other formats. And so by partnering with them, what we're trying to do is, again, is to really try and reduce the development time. So we did some economic modeling around the development of cytosponge, and quite stringent modeling actually. And what we realized was that had the cancer hospital been in place, we could have reduced the development of cytosponge by about 3 years. And that's just one example. And so if you think about it, and it's very simple things like a chemist or an engineer might be coming up with some kind of device, but because they're not clinically trained, they don't think about how acceptable this might be to a patient, how realistic it will be to deploy. If it takes half an hour to run the test, you've got to sit there, that's not really feasible. All of these quite simple and basic things. If you've got individuals in the room, literally in the building together, co-developing this, it's amazing how much time this can save. And actually, very importantly, is to the point you made, is jettison bad ideas early. We don't want to waste money by people having a pet project that I think is absolutely fantastic, when actually it should be at least from the Cambridge Cancer Centre side, not included early on or for very long as an idea.
It does answer that problem. A lot of the time, the industry have always said that the NHS is often impregnable, if I could say the word.
Yeah.
And so the ambition is that the cancer hospital would, you kind of remove those barriers.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that with the long-term plan from the NHS. So the long-term plan is very ambitious in terms of what it wants to achieve by 2034, 55,000 more lives saved, a step change in the number of patients diagnosed early. There's a general recognition if that's to be done, it has to engage industry. And that dovetails very nicely with the life science industrial strategy. But the reality is we have to make the NHS more friendly and more open. That doesn't mean that the principles of the NHS go away. It actually means that patients who are being treated in NHS hospitals get access to research as quickly as possible, whether that originates in industry or whether it originates in academia. And, you know, certainly from my area in brain tumours, which have some of the most dismal outcomes, patients are crying out to be part of research. It's usually that they don't have the opportunity to be involved in research rather than the other way around. And that's a fantastic aspect of the British public. They really want to see that happen. And so being able to bring those kind of innovations in an appropriate way that's rigorously controlled and regulated, and it is about bringing advantages to patients. I think the NHS is a great environment that's ready to do that.
There is going to be a lot going on the Cambridge Biomedical Campus in the next couple of years. And obviously there is the plans to build a children's hospital as well.
Yeah.
How will the children's hospital integrate with the cancer hospital? So heaven forbid, one of my children was diagnosed. How would they be treated at the children's hospital, or would they come to the cancer hospital, or is there some of a plan or a journey for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, you might not know, but actually I'm a pediatric oncologist. So originally I'm a children's cancer doctor. So I was absolutely thrilled for the children's hospital. We're the only region in the UK that doesn't have a children's hospital. So absolutely crucial. And as a pediatrician, all pediatricians would say that the best place for a child to be treated is in a child-friendly environment. And so children's cancer will be treated in the children's hospital. And my great friend and colleague, who actually moved simultaneously almost from the US with me, David Rowich, who's chair of pediatrics, is leading that. He also has an interest in children's brain tumours. And they have fantastic plans for very similar to what we're doing in cancer, but in the children's hospital. The population that's always missed out is the adolescents. They're the individuals who are somewhere between adulthood and childhood, and that's a very difficult area to treat. And we need to make sure that we're very sensitive. Some adolescents want to be treated in a child-friendly environment. Some adolescents want to be treated in an adult environment. I think the other thing that's also worth bearing in mind is that our view of pediatric cancer has changed. Actually, the upper limit's going up much greater into the 20s. It's not because those individuals are children, but they actually have cancers that occur in children that are not common in adults, and so they need that expertise. So what I would envisage, which Cambridge is great at, is having that kind of collaboration. So a child might be treated in a pediatric unit, or an adult might be treated in an adult unit, but there'll be that interplay between the teams looking after them so that we can make sure they get the right and the best possible care.
We touched on it before, and you've kind of alluded to it a little bit there about that it's not just about the science, but it's also about the emotion. So the support services that and support networks that many patients have, such as Maggie's, how would they be incorporated into the new hospital? Yeah,
so I mean, a good friend of the Maggie organisation. I was there when their new centre down in London, and very much hope, I don't know if it's official yet, but I very much hope that we're going to have a new one on the biomedical campus. I've been pushing for that. They're an amazing organisation. And so I think that they would they are very much partners with us. I talk to them regularly and have worked closely with them on the Biomedical Campus Initiative. And again, was fortunate enough to speak at their opening in London. So we would see them very much as part of the team for developing really a holistic treatment and care for our cancer patients here in Cambridge.
Thank you. Another question that has come in, will there be capacity to enable inpatient admissions for complex research studies?
Yes, that's a really important issue. And actually, one of the reasons that we are increasing our focus on early detection and on ambulatory care, so sort of outpatient care, is that I think the way that cancer will change in the future is that we will hopefully progressively see most cases of cancer treated in the community early on or with minimal hospital intervention. But what it will mean is that the numbers of patients who are treated in hospital would be particularly sick, a smaller number of the most aggressive cases. But what that gives us the opportunity to do, if we're treating less patients in that setting, is really think about those complex, difficult cases and how we might intervene with research. So I think that's exactly what we're envisaging in terms of the inpatient beds that will be present in the hospital.
A lot has been said about Cambridge and kind of leading edge technology and the kind of the development of the Cambridge cluster and how we kind of lead the way with life sciences. Do you kind of sometimes think, how can Cambridge tell this story better throughout the rest of the world so that they can kind of join in with and learn from the things that we're doing? Or do you think Cambridge needs sometimes to actually go out to the rest of the world and see what it can learn from there, from other areas? And what do you think might work best?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I'd say there are two parts to that, if I've heard you correctly. The first part to it is Cambridge is quite, it might come as a surprise, but Cambridge is actually quite modest. It doesn't shout about itself generally. It doesn't sort of progress or put out its brand like it could do. I think it probably doesn't do that enough, actually. I mean, if the Cambridge brand was in the United States, it would be everywhere. I was a scientific director at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is a arguably tiny cancer research hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, of all places. Now, it is the sole it's a sole NCI cancer center dedicated solely to children. Each year they raise $1.4 billion for the hospital with their brand. Now, the Cambridge brand is enormous. I think we could probably do a better job of that. I mean, in the last couple of years, we brought in 20 million from a philanthropist in the New York area, one from Hong Kong, to support the early cancer detection of integrated cancer medicine, working with our friends in QDAR, who are the Cambridge University Development and Alumni Relations Organization in Cambridge. So I think it's a great opportunity to do that. But that hotel idea also is important for Cambridge, with the strength of its science, to show humility and an openness that it doesn't know everything. And I think actually by allowing people into the system, that hotel idea might be small, but allowing groups from other academic institutions to come in is really an important thing to do. And I think one of the things that the UK really has is a sense of a community in the CIEK. The CIEK organization, if you go to, I keep using the US as an example because I work there, you have these fantastic sort of mammoth centers, but they're very siloed and they do compete with one another. Because of the NHS, I think, which softens that, because of the CIEK network, which encourages it, I think we have a great opportunity to be greater than the sum of the parts in the UK and see that kind of collaboration, like I discussed with the Marsden, to really make the UK a powerhouse in the war against cancer.
So what's the next steps then for the cancer hospital? You kind of alluded to where it might be on the campus, that the government has announced funding. What happens next?
Yeah, so we have 8 work streams active at the moment in all areas. So there's a series of documents, official documents you have to go through. The first is the outline business case. It sounds that's short, but it's hundreds of pages. And that's basically to give an idea of what this thing will look like, what will go in it. Economically, does it make sense? Strategically, does it make sense? All of those kind of aspects. There are 8 components that we're working on. And that will go and be assessed next year. And then we start the full business case, which is a longer version of that, which is really to define, yeah, absolutely, this makes sense. It really is all costed pounds, shillings and pence. We know exactly what it will look like, you know, right down to the sort of plug socket kind of thing. And then that will get viewed. And all of this goes through the Treasury and various parts of government. And then we'll get the go ahead. And of course, in the background, desperately raising money for the other aspects of it, because the government aren't going to pay for all of it. And the university is generously stepping in to support, you know, the research side of it. But at the moment, the university is facing the same problems that everyone is in COVID. So we've really got a strong philanthropic effort ongoing to raise the money that will fill that gap.
Thank you. That hour has flown by. So that would say it's a fascinating area of discussion. So thank you ever so much, Richard, for giving me.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for everyone for listening. Really enjoyed it.
That's great. And also to thank everybody who's stayed with us throughout the whole of the webinar. It's great to see so many people who are logging in, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's on Eventbrite. So thank you for giving up your time. The next talk we have is with Billy.
Can I just say, if anybody has any questions and they want to email you, we can answer them.
That's fine. Yeah,
if you also will email them.
Yeah, if you come via the CUHP website, you'll be able to, which is cuhp.org.uk. If you go on the contact query section there, we'll be able to get those questions through to you. I was just about to say that our next talk is on Tuesday, the 24th of November, with Billy Boyle from Owlstone Medical, who Richard, you were talking about earlier. So please sign up for that. The event is on Eventbrite already. And also, Don't want to forget to remind people to watch the last episode of Surgeons, which is on BBC Two at 9 o'clock tonight, which just shows some of the fantastic clinical teams who are in Addenbrooke and Royal Papworth as well. So I know it's the last episode tonight, so make sure you all watch. So thanks again, Richard. Thanks again, everybody, for helping and coming along tonight, and see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.